Bronze Age Omnibus. So we've got a nice cover right here, and unfortunately black interior on the page. That's okay. The cover's quite nice. We can take a look at the back cover, and I'll read you what it says on the back cover. Deep in the bayous of Louisiana, far from civilization's grasp, a shadowed creature seen only in the fleeting glimpses roils the black waters, a twisted vegetative mockery of a man, a swamp thing. One of the most acclaimed creations to emerge from the Bronze Age of comics, this shambling, muck-encrusted figure swiftly became one of DC's iconic characters, and his shocking stories are universally hailed as some of the finest tales of gothic horror in the history of American comics. So, what's it contain? Contains House of Secrets 92, his debut, Swamp Thing 1 through 24, and then it became the Saga of the Swamp Thing 1 through 19, and Saga of the Swamp Thing Annual number 1. Why is this book important? Well, first of all, it introduced Swamp Thing, who became a major character. Second of all, it's written by the fabulous Len Wein. I'm going to say Wein because it could be wine, but I don't know. I'm going to say Wein. And the first 10 issues were illustrated by the legendary Bernie Wrightson. Pardon me while I take a sip of root beer. So we're just going to page through it, see what's what. Here we have the creators, the writers, the artists. Swamp Thing created by Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson. That's important. Table of contents. Very nice table of contents starting out. Lists all the artists and writers, which is great. And this is a pretty sizable, good chunk of material, as you can see by everything listed here. But it's got a lot of good stuff. Nice foreword by Len Wein, written in 1991. Here's the famous cover to House of Secrets 92, where Swamp Thing was introduced in a short story. And here's some of the fantastic young Bernie Wrightson art. Sadly, both of those creators are gone now. Let's see if I can move this up and fit it in better. There we go. And it was a short story, so it ended fairly quickly. They waited a while, and then they reintroduced Swamp Thing and told his origin story in Swamp Thing number 1. And here we have some more of this great Bernie Wrightson art. Now one thing, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but this is has got very interesting crossover. Let's see if I can find it here. Okay, it's the next story. There's Batman right there. This is Swamp Thing number 7, still illustrated by Bernie Wrightson and written by Len Wein. But if I'm correct, I believe this is when Swamp Thing actually gets introduced into the DC universe and becomes part of the DC universe, as the introduction of Batman effectively pushes him into canon for DC universe. Just going to page through some more of that Wrightson art. Tells the familiar story of Alec Holland getting a biorestorative formula that he created, blown up in a lab, diving in with the biorestorative formula into the swamp, and becoming, as they say, the muck-encrusted Swamp Thing. These are stories, of course, I love because this is right when I was a teenager, back in the Bronze Age, back in the 70s. So these were things that I dug, and I happened to really appreciate, I even appreciated Bernie Wrightson art back then. So I definitely dug it. The writing, that's cool. I don't remember that one. Len Wein wrote, I believe, the first 13 issues. Bernie Wrightson drew the first 10 issues. And they started calling it the Saga of the Swamp Thing within the book, and then it became Saga of the Swamp Thing. You can see the colors are really nicely created on the glossy paper. We've got some crazy creatures fighting Swamp Thing. And they introduce familiar villains like Arcane. Another person, Matt Cable, is introduced. There's Arcane right there. Then if we flip to a little further in, let's see, issue 8, so we got to flip pretty far to where Nestor Redondo started doing some of the art, and that guy can draw. Here's some Nestor Redondo art, and that's issue 12, so Len Wein's still writing it. Here's some of the Nestor Redondo art. And he goes on, gosh, that almost looks like a Wally Wood face right there. You can see it. But I'm pretty sure Wally Wood didn't have anything to do with Swamp Thing. Let's go to the issue where a young Dave McElhinney started writing. That was probably Swamp Thing 14. And here's some more. So this is where McElhinney started writing. McElhinney, famous for creating Venom and Spider-Man, along with Todd McFarlane. And that famous run, the Spider-Man run with Todd McFarlane. McElhinney also did the Eric Larson issues with Spider-Man. He wrote some really good Spidey stories. Certainly better than the Todd McFarlane stories that were butchered by Todd McFarlane. Oh, sorry, I probably just turned off 90% of my crowd by criticizing Todd McFarlane's writing. Sorry about that. He can draw, though. I'll give him that. So now, then you get, shockingly, 30 cents. And a new look. Some guy named Saber. I don't even remember this. Because you asked for it, I don't remember asking for it, but we got the new Swamp Thing. He's becoming human there. What the devil? I don't know, I don't remember that. But Jerry Conway started writing too, with Nestor Redondo art. Nestor Redondo's a good artist, and of course Jerry Conway's Jerry Conway. Looks like Peter Parker almost. Now let's see who the artist is here. So it looks like the art's a little different. Tom Yates is the artist. Martin Pasco is the writer. So the art stays fairly consistently decent. I'm going to have to reread this as an adult. As a teenager, I loved it. I know it's a classic, and I know that it's the Bronze Age, so not everything has to make sense. Like, look at this cover. What's this about? 60 cents? I know you guys think 60 cents isn't very much money, but back then, when you were in a 15-cent of issue budget, 60 cents was a lot. I know I'm dating myself. I am the gray-haired silver fox after all. And the fact that it does take Saga of the Swamp Thing all the way up to when Steve Bissette started drawing, and it finishes right before the Alan Moore issues. So everybody's got the same question. I don't have the answer. The question is, will Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run get an omnibus? I am going to go out on a limb because I have absolutely no idea for sure what is in the minds of DC. I couldn't tell you. But I will tell you that I think it's a possibility, a strong possibility with this omnibus that they would come out and omnibize Alan Moore's famous run. Because right now it's only available in some standard size hardcovers, which many of them are hard to find. And that's really, and it's available in some hard to find trade paperbacks too. So that's really annoying. Let's see, this is Steve Bissette, John Totleben art. So that is pretty annoying that it's hard to find the famous Alan Moore run at all. And they could please thousands of people if they would just collect it in a nice format. It doesn't have to be absolute, but an omnibus would be great. So here you see some very nice art. Very complete story of Swamp Thing. I highly recommend this book to all you people out there with a remote interest in the character, remote interest in Bronze Age Swamp Thing. This is fun science fiction, fantasy, a little bit of horror. It's a lot of fun to read and get a feel for what things were like back when I was a boy. That's right. So, it doesn't really have, as far as I know, let's see if it has any extras. I sincerely doubt it because DC Omnis generally don't. No, it ends on a black page. There's your extra, an extra black page. So there we go. That is the Swamp Thing overview. I hope that you've enjoyed this. Leave your comments. Please subscribe. And let me know if there's any other overviews you want. I generally buy lots of omnibuses, omnis, and I'm happy to take requests. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you later. OmniDog out. Hey OmniDogs and OmniKittens, it's OmniDog here. Thanks for tuning in to another root beer review where I'm doing a lot of them because I'm still working on this Frost Top root beer, which is actually pretty good. So, I mean, I got 32 ounces, I got about 24 ounces left to go, so I'm going to be doing several reviews. Decent. So the topic today is why I dislike Neal Adams' Batman Omnibus so much. Or I may title it, Why I Hate Neal Adams' Batman Omnibus so much. So what we're talking about is this beast of a book. This is without the dust jacket on. And it is the Batman stories that pretty much changed the character around for good back in the late 60s, early 70s. And Neal Adams had a lot to do with it because let's kind of set up the history here of what Batman was like before Neal Adams and Dennis O'Neil, the writer, got their hands on him, because Denny O'Neil deserves a lot of credit for changing the character of Batman. Now, from my own collection, here's what Batman used to be like back in the 60s. Now, that's a cool cover, fighting the Joker. Joker was just sort of a goofy character that was it was almost like he was taken from the Batman TV show. And this is what the art was like I mean, you can see it's kind of static, blocky, not really fluid. The stories were sort of crime-solving punch-outs that, you know, looking back at them, they really weren't memorable. And you look at how blocky and not fluid the movements are of the characters, and the stories really weren't that interesting. They just weren't memorable. They'd be fighting, you know, people like the Grasshopper Gang and, you know, other stories like that. And this followed on the heels. What came before it was always Batman in space. You know, in the early 60s, late 50s, I was born in 59, but I collected enough so that I have enough space. Batman and Batmite go to space with Ace the Bat Hound and the original Kathy Kane Batwoman. It was, you know, it's no wonder that Marvel showed up and swooped the market from them, because Batman just wasn't a very interesting character at that point. Enter Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams. And Frank Miller is very open about saying that The Dark Knight Returns was drawn a lot on what Dennis O'Neil gave him, because Dennis O'Neil took kind of a goofy crime-solving Batman, made him much darker, more intense, and Neil Adams' artwork, of course, was incredible. It was a completely fresh breath of air, breath of fresh air, rather, fresh air of breath, whatever the saying is, because he was always quoted as saying, if superheroes existed, they'd look the way I draw them. And he deserves a lot of credit for changing how superheroes were drawn. Now, Dennis O'Neil has to be considered in this conversation because he gave Neil Adams some really great stories to illustrate. But why do I hate